Imagine this. In a single moment, the entire world you believe is real is actually just a very small part of something far greater. Not a scientific theory, not a work of fiction, but a possibility that human beings spoke about thousands of years ago, and yet we chose to ignore. You are still living in a familiar world. The sky is still there. The ground still feels solid beneath your feet. Everything seems stable, governed by rules, held together by order. But have you ever stopped and asked, what is actually keeping all of this from falling apart? We believe gravity holds us in place, that the laws of physics control everything. But what if there is another layer of reality, a structure that science has not yet been able to reach? What if this world is not an open space, but a contained region? Pause for a moment and really think about that. What if there is a boundary surrounding this entire world, but no one can see it? A boundary that does not exist on any map, cannot be measured, cannot be crossed, and yet still exists. Not an ocean, not the atmosphere, but an invisible band, like a massive lock placed around our reality. Prophetic history explained. There are ancient accounts that describe something like this. They did not call it a wall. They did not call it a barrier. They described it as a mountain range, but not the kind of mountains any human could climb. A range that exists nowhere in particular, yet surrounds everything. Some scholars described it as a closed circle. Others said the entire world lies within it, like a small object inside a massive ring. They called it Kaf. But what makes Kaf unsettling is not its shape or its size. It is the question, why does it exist? If Kaf were just part of nature, then why can no human reach it? Why has no civilization, ancient or modern, ever been able to identify its exact location? And why do all descriptions of it share one thing in common? No one can pass beyond it. That leads to a possibility many people would rather avoid, that Kaf was not created for us to explore, but to make sure we cannot go beyond. If that is true, then this world is not as free as we believe. It begins to look more like a stabilized space, a contained zone, as if something is being kept under control. But what is being controlled? What lies outside, or what is inside? That question has haunted those who studied Kaf for centuries. And the deeper you go into ancient descriptions, the stranger the picture becomes. Because Kaf is not just a physical boundary, it is a boundary of perception. There are mentions of lands where light never reaches, no sun, no moon, no cycle of day and night as we understand it. A place where time itself does not seem to function in familiar ways. And the most astonishing part is that there are beings there, not human, not animals as we know them, but entirely different communities with their own laws, their own way of existing that we cannot explain. They do not eat. They do not drink. They do not depend on material resources the way we do. Yet they exist in a stable and organized way. And what makes it even more difficult to comprehend is that they have no awareness that humanity exists. Think about that. We have spent thousands of years exploring the universe, searching for life beyond Earth, while there could be other worlds right beside us, completely separated, not by distance, but by boundary. If Kaf truly exists as a separating layer, then it may not only prevent us from going out, it may also prevent something else from coming in. That is when this stops being just a legend. It becomes a question. A question that, once you begin to take seriously, you will not be able to see the world the same way again. Maybe this world is not everything. Maybe what we see is only a small part of a multi-layered reality. And maybe the real boundary is not somewhere far away, but within the limits of our own perception. If you want to keep exploring mysteries like this, things most people have never even heard about, subscribe and support Prophetic History Explained. That support helps us keep bringing you deeper stories, perspectives you will not find anywhere else. Because this journey has only just begun. If such a boundary exists, then the most natural question is, What lies beyond it? But the answers left behind in ancient sources are not simple. They do not just say there is another place. They describe entire regions of reality completely separate, where the rules we are used to no longer apply. There are descriptions of lands immersed in absolute darkness. Not the darkness of night, where you can still see moonlight or starlight, or at least sense the passage of time. This is a different kind of darkness, a state where light has never reached. No sunrise, no sunset, no repeating cycles to mark time. In such a place, the idea of day and night does not exist the way we understand it. And when light disappears, everything begins to operate under a completely different logic. Within those spaces, there are mentions of cities so vast that the human mind struggles to imagine them. Not small settlements, but enormous structures stretching beyond any familiar scale. These cities are not built from materials we recognize. They do not reflect light like stone, nor absorb it like metal, because there is no light there to reflect or absorb. But what makes these places truly unbelievable is not their size or their environment. It is the beings within them. They are not human, not anything we have studied. They do not eat, do not drink, do not rely on physical energy sources the way all known life does. Yet they exist, not in chaos, but in structure. There is organization, there are systems. They live, but not in a way we understand life. And the most unsettling part is that they have no awareness of us. Not because they are hiding, but because in their entire framework of understanding, humanity has never existed. Try to put yourself in that position. We have always believed we are at the center of the world, that everything revolves around human existence. But if entire civilizations exist independently, without awareness, without interaction, then what does that mean? It means the world is not built around us. It means we are just a small part of something far larger. And perhaps we are confined within a separate layer. Ancient descriptions emphasize not just the existence of these worlds, but their absolute separation. Not distance, but a kind of barrier that cannot be crossed through movement alone. You could travel thousands of miles, cross oceans, cross deserts, and still never reach them. Not because they are far away, but because they are not in the same layer of reality. That is a difficult idea to accept, because it completely breaks the way we understand space. We assume that if something exists, it must be somewhere, and therefore can be found. But if there are places that do not share the same coordinate system as us, then searching for them using physical methods becomes meaningless. That may explain why, throughout history, no expedition has ever reached these regions. Not because we have not gone far enough, but because we have never gone in the right direction. And perhaps that direction is not physical at all. When you begin to think this way, another possibility appears. That reality is not a single layer, but multiple layers stacked together, each with its own rules, its own beings, its own system of existence. And those layers do not overlap unless something breaks the boundary. If Kaf is a boundary, then it may not surround just one world, it may separate many. And that leads to an even deeper question. If there are civilizations that exist without knowing us, could there be others watching us without our awareness? And if one day that boundary were no longer intact, what would happen when two separated worlds begin to touch? Humanity may not be ready for that answer, because it would not just change how we see the universe, it would change how we see ourselves, that we are not the center, not unique, and perhaps never truly alone. In recent years, people have started talking more openly about something once dismissed as fiction: unidentified flying objects, movements beyond the limits of any known technology, brief appearances, followed by complete disappearance without a trace. People call them UFOs, and from there, a common assumption grows that we are being observed by extraterrestrial beings. It sounds reasonable. When humans cannot explain something, they tend to place it far away, beyond Earth. But there is another possibility. one that is rarely discussed because it is much closer than we think. That what we are seeing has never come from outside, but from a layer of reality that has always existed alongside us. In many ancient sources, there are descriptions of a type of being with very specific characteristics. They are not bound to a fixed form. They can change shape, appear in different forms, even mimic familiar things to avoid detection. They are not bound by space the way we understand it. They can appear in one place and vanish instantly without traveling through distance. And most importantly, they can influence perception. That means they do not just appear before human eyes. They can control how humans see them. We call them Jinn. When you place these two ideas side by side, something becomes difficult to ignore. The descriptions of UFOs, their impossible movement, sudden disappearance, shifting forms, interaction with consciousness, closely match what has been said about Jinn long before the idea of aliens ever existed. So what if we misunderstood from the beginning? What if these beings are not coming from distant planets, but have always existed within the same space as us, just in a different layer? This is not just a theory. It is a different way of looking at everything we observe. Instead of asking where they come from in the universe, maybe the question should be where they exist within this world. Some perspectives suggest that Jinn are not just invisible beings. They possess intelligence, creativity, and in some cases, the ability to develop forms of technology that humans cannot comprehend. If that is true, then what we call spacecraft may not be vehicles traveling between planets. They may be manifestations of technology operating within a different frame of reality, a frame where our physics does not apply. But what makes this idea truly unsettling is not their existence. It is the possibility that they can interact with us without us ever realizing. If a being can control how you see it, then you cannot be certain that what you see is real. If a being can take any form, then you cannot know when you are facing it. And if a being can exist right beside you, without your awareness, then the boundary between seen and unseen becomes unreliable. This is where the story stops being just an interesting theory. It becomes a question of perception. Humans trust their senses. We believe what we see is real, and what we do not see does not exist. But if there are beings capable of interfering with that process, then that entire belief system begins to break down. Some scholars have warned that these beings may not simply coexist. They may actively create images, phenomena, to guide human perception in specific directions, not to reveal themselves, but to mislead. If that is true, then some of what people call contact with aliens may not be a meeting between civilizations, but a misunderstanding created intentionally. And that leads to a question very few people are willing to face. If we have misnamed what we are seeing, how many other things have we misunderstood? And if these beings truly exist in another layer, then what is separating them from us? The answer may return to something we mentioned at the beginning: a boundary, a separation, a structure we cannot see, but that is always there. If Kaf truly exists as such a boundary, then it may not just separate space, it may separate perception, between what humans can understand and what lies beyond that limit. And perhaps the most unsettling part is not that these beings exist, but that we have been very close to them for a very long time without ever realizing it. As these ideas expand, the simplest question becomes the hardest to answer. If Kaf exists, where is it? Human instinct is to locate, to map, to assign coordinates, but Kaf does not seem to follow that logic. Every attempt to place it within physical space only makes the answer more unclear. Some believe it lies in the most remote regions of Earth, places no human has reached. Areas of darkness where sunlight disappears for months, where conditions make exploration nearly impossible. That idea feels logical. If something is hidden, it must be somewhere unexplored. But the problem is, humans have gone very far. Satellites have scanned nearly the entire planet. Areas once blank on maps now have data, images, coordinates, and nowhere in all of that is there clear evidence of a structure surrounding the world. That forces a different way of thinking. Maybe Kaf does not exist within the same physical system as us. Maybe it is not somewhere you can go, but somewhere you must shift into to perceive. This idea is not new. In deeper traditions, especially those focused on inner understanding, Kaf is described as a boundary between layers of reality. Not a mountain of stone, but a limit between what can be sensed and what lies beyond. It is not a place, it is a state. Some scholars describe Kaf as the meeting point between three realms: the physical world we live in, the spiritual world we cannot directly access, and an intermediate layer where images, memory, and consciousness exist in another form. From that perspective, Kaf is not something you reach by moving through space. It is not east or west, not on Earth or in space. It exists at the edge of perception. And that explains why every attempt to locate it has failed. Because we are searching with the wrong tools. We use eyes to find what does not belong to light, maps to find what is not in space, physical logic to explain what does not follow physical laws. But if Kaf is a boundary between layers, then it may exist right here, right now, and we would not recognize it. Modern science, even without mentioning Kaf, opens the door to this idea. Research into higher dimensions suggests reality may not be limited to the dimensions we experience. There could be others, overlapping, coexisting, but not interacting directly. We cannot see them, cannot touch them, yet they may still influence the physical world. That may sound abstract, but think of it simply. There are things you cannot see, yet you know they exist because you see their effects. Energy, forces, waves, all examples. So if unseen spaces can exist, then their existence is not impossible. And if those spaces exist, then beings within them are not impossible either. From that perspective, Kaf may not be hidden. It may always be there, just beyond human perception. This changes everything. Instead of living in one reality, we may exist in one layer, and around it, other layers, with different rules, different forms of life, different purposes. In that structure, Kaf is not an object. It is a boundary between layers. A boundary that, without the ability to cross, humans will never pass. And perhaps that is not accidental. Perhaps it exists to maintain balance, to prevent worlds from colliding, to ensure each layer operates within its own system. But that also raises another question. If one day that boundary were broken, what would happen? Then the question would no longer be where Kaf is. But what happens when we finally see it? When all these pieces come together, what remains is not a clear answer, but a feeling. A realization that what we call reality may not be complete. Humans have always tried to understand the world by dividing it. Science from spirituality. What can be measured from what can only be felt. But the deeper we go into ideas like Kaf, Jinn, and unexplained phenomena, those boundaries begin to blur. What was once called myth begins to echo ideas modern science is only starting to explore. Multiple layers of reality, unseen existence, forces we recognize only through their effects. But the most important point is not proving whether Kaf exists. It is recognizing our own limits. Humans tend to believe that if something cannot be seen, measured, or tested, it does not exist. But history has proven otherwise. Many things were denied for centuries until we gained the ability to perceive them. So the deeper question is this: how many things exist right now beyond our perception? And if they do, where do we stand in all of this? We are no longer at the center as we once believed, not the peak of understanding, not the only conscious beings in an empty universe. Instead, we may be just a small part of a layered structure where each layer has its own rules, its own life, its own purpose. In that structure, Kaf is not just a mystery, It is a symbol of a limit humanity has not crossed, a sign that there are doors we do not yet know how to open, and perhaps are not meant to open. This leads to another thought. Maybe Kaf does not exist to be discovered, but to remind us that some things are beyond reach, that some knowledge is not always meant to be obtained through effort alone, and that some boundaries are not created to be broken, but to be respected. In the modern world, humans increasingly believe in control, that with enough time and technology, everything can be understood. But ideas like Kaf suggest something different, that not everything is designed for us to fully understand, and perhaps not understanding is part of the truth. Looking back at everything, from ancient descriptions, modern theories, to spiritual perspectives, one thing becomes clearer. The question is not where Kaf is, but where we are. We stand in a world we believe is everything, but it may only be a part, a contained, stabilized, protected, or controlled part. And if one day those limits change, then everything we know about reality will change with them. But before thinking about crossing boundaries, perhaps the more important step is recognizing that they exist. Because once you recognize a limit, you begin to understand your place. And once you understand your place, you begin to ask the right questions. Maybe we will never see Kaf the way we expect. Maybe we will never map it or capture it in images. But that does not mean it does not exist. It may exist as part of a greater system, one we are only beginning to touch. And within that system, everything has its place, humans included. Beings we do not yet understand, and boundaries we have not yet crossed. Allah knows best. When you look back at this entire journey, one thing becomes clearer than ever. Not that we have found the answer to Kaf or fully understood unseen worlds, but that we have begun to recognize a deeper truth, that human knowledge has limits. We often live with the belief that what we see is all there is, that what science has not proven does not exist. But history has shown the opposite. Some truths existed long before we were able to recognize them. The story of Kaf, of unseen worlds, of beings beyond perception, is not just meant to spark curiosity. It is a mirror. It forces us to ask, how much do we truly understand? And the answer may not be easy to accept. That perhaps we understand only a very small part. The deepest lesson is not about believing or rejecting these ideas. It is about how we respond to what we do not understand. When humans become arrogant, thinking they know enough, they stop learning. But when they accept that there are things beyond their reach, that is when growth truly begins. In everyday life, this has a very practical meaning. Instead of rushing to judge, to deny, or to blindly believe, learn to pause and reflect. Keep an open mind without losing clarity. Understand that not everything can be explained immediately, and that does not make it meaningless. Sometimes, what we do not understand is exactly what helps us recognize our limits and search for truth with humility. If you want to continue exploring stories like this, stories that are not just meant to be heard, but to be understood, reflected on, and allowed to reshape how you see the world, join the Prophetic History Explained community. And do not forget to subscribe and support the channel so we can keep bringing you deeper, more meaningful content in the videos ahead.